What if I told you that the most groundbreaking advancement in aerospace engineering over the last half-century wasn't conceived inside a cutting-edge laboratory or a gleaming office, but in the dim solitude of a forgotten parking lot? What if the person who rewrote the future of military aviation wasn't even considered worthy of a badge to enter the building? Imagine a mind so brilliant it could solve the unsolvable, yet so invisible to the world that it sat beneath flickering street lamps, ignored and underestimated. And imagine the brutal irony, that while billion-dollar decisions were made in glass towers above, the answer to their most desperate problems sat quietly below, wrapped not in prestige, but in purpose. This is a story that disrupts every preconception we've been taught about genius, how it looks, where it lives, and what it sounds like when it finally dares to speak. It's about a shift, a seismic moment, not driven by status or connections, but by raw, unfiltered capability. It begins not in a boardroom, but in the silence of waiting. Let me take you back to a stifling summer evening in Dallas, Texas. The year is 2023. The sun bleeds over the skyline like a final warning. Inside Avante Industries, an elite fortress of innovation funded by government billions, a high-stakes project teeters on the brink of collapse. Careers are unraveling, reputations are fraying. A $30 million zero-cent stealth technology initiative is bleeding out on the operating table, and no one has a cure. But our story starts far from that crisis room. It starts in the quiet. There, in the nearly deserted lot below, sits a young woman in a rusted Honda Civic. Her name is Emily Dawson. She's 23, with a mind sharpened like a scalpel and a heart heavy with unfinished dreams. Each night she returns to this place like it's sacred ground, flipping through a worn leather notebook illuminated only by the trembling light of a dying lamp. That notebook belonged to her mother. 6 months ago, Emily applied to intern at Avante, the very institution whose halls pulse with possibilities and whose doors slammed shut in her face without a second glance. No Ivy League pedigree, no glowing referrals, just brilliance tucked into a resume that no one bothered to read. But she didn't vanish. She waited. Why? What keeps her coming back night after night? It isn't stubbornness. It's destiny calling in a voice only she can hear. And the answer lies inked in her mother's handwriting. On the last page of that notebook. A whisper from the past. Never be afraid to fix what others fear touching. Her mother, Catherine Dawson, had once walked a similar path. A visionary in her own right, denied entry into Avante not for lack of talent, but for the simple sin of graduating from the wrong school. Back then, the gatekeepers didn't see her potential. They saw her absence from their clubs, their campuses, their circles. So Catherine poured her soul into a notebook instead of patent, and when pancreatic cancer claimed her life while Emily was still just 16, that notebook became more than paper. It became purpose. Emily wasn't just carrying designs. She was carrying a legacy. She was carrying the ache of dreams deferred, the sting of rejection tattooed across generations. And that ache, over time, had transformed into fuel. She may have graduated at the top of her class from Dallas Community College, but her acceptance letter into the real world never arrived. Just like her mother before her, she was overlooked, judged not for her mind, but for the name on her diploma. Still, she came back every night. Above her, the air was thick with the hum of tension and million-dollar decisions. Inside Avante's sleek headquarters, men in tailored suits and women in high-tech labs argued over how to salvage the sinking Phantom Drive initiative. An experimental stealth engine system so advanced it could render aircraft virtually invisible. A technological miracle, if only it worked. At the center of that unraveling empire stood Nolan Mercer, Avante's iron-willed CEO, a 42-year-old Harvard MBA with a mind like a machine and a heart like a vault. Nolan believed in pedigree, in prestige, in the unspoken rules that said real value only came from elite institutions. He had no room in his world for anomalies, only for credentials. He wasn't alone. Kyle Peterson, just 26 and fresh out of MIT, wore his academic accolades like body armor. Brilliant, yes, but condescending, cold. The kind of man who built walls with his words and sharpened them with arrogance. Then there was Donna Brooks, head of R&D. Unlike her colleagues, she had climbed her way up through grit, not grace. But even Donna had learned to survive in Avante's ecosystem by playing the game, by staying within the lines even when she ached to color outside of them. None of them knew what waited below. None of them could have predicted that the savior of their greatest endeavor wasn't sitting in their conference room, but in the shadows, uninvited, unnoticed, and entirely indispensable. Because sometimes the person who sees the truth most clearly is the one no one sees at all. And sometimes the miracle you've been praying for is sitting quietly beneath a street lamp, just waiting for the door to finally open. The Phantom Drive was supposed to be their magnum opus, an engine so advanced it could whisper through the skies, undetectable by even the most sophisticated radar. It was a confluence of groundbreaking technologies: electromagnetic field manipulation, adaptive camouflage that changed with its surroundings, and propulsion so silent it felt like flight itself had gone stealth. 3 years. $30 million. A dream that promised to cement Avant's legacy in military history. But tonight, that dream was dying. Earlier that evening, during what was supposed to be a routine systems check, disaster struck. Every subsystem, each one painstakingly engineered, failed simultaneously. No warning, no gradual decline, just silence. A total collapse. The kind of failure that doesn't come with a manual. Panic spread like wildfire through the lab. Engineers worked furiously under the unforgiving glare of LED panels, poring over diagnostics, resetting protocols, testing every known variable. But the readout stayed the same: complete failure. Kyle Peterson, sharp and exhausted, ran every test his education had armed him with. Donna Brooks made desperate calls to former professors, to MIT, to Caltech. Even Nolan Mercer abandoned his perch atop the corporate ladder and made calls to his powerful contacts at Boeing and Lockheed. All for nothing. The engine might as well have been a multi-million-dollar sculpture. Impressive, yes, but utterly useless. By 11:47 p.m., the air inside the Avante conference room was thick with fatigue and fear. Everyone knew what was at stake. The Pentagon review loomed just 18 hours away. If they couldn't deliver a working prototype, the contract and the company's future would disappear. Nolan stood at the head of the room, the lines on his face deeper than usual, his voice tight with strain. If we can't fix this by morning, we don't just lose the contract. We lose everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kyle leaned back, rubbing his temples. We've tried every known solution. It's like the system's rejecting logic itself. Nothing makes sense. Donna nodded, her voice low. Every diagnostic says it should work, but the engine won't even respond to startup commands. It's as if, she hesitated, as if it's resisting us. There was a long pause. The fluorescent lights buzzed above like static. Outside, the soft wheels of a janitor's cart echoed down the hallway. That janitor was Mark Dawson. For 8 years, Mark had cleaned Avante's floors. 8 years of silence, of watching brilliance from the edges. A ghost in a world of intellect and ambition. But tonight, his routine collided with fate. The emergency meeting had left the conference room a mess, and Mark, ever dutiful, entered quietly to clean. He tried to stay invisible, but Nolan's boiling frustration found a new target. "You know what, Mark?" Nolan snapped. his voice edged with bitterness. Maybe we need a fresh perspective, someone without all these degrees and titles. Maybe the answer isn't in the PhDs. It was meant to be sarcasm, a cruel jab at his own team masked as a joke. Kyle picked up the thread, smirking as he typed. "That's a brilliant idea, Mr. Mercer," he said with a mocking tone. "Hey, Mark, doesn't your daughter hang around outside? Maybe she can give us a hand." Laughter rippled around the room, jaded, tired laughter that masked fear with cruelty. "I've seen her," Kyle continued, clearly enjoying himself, "always buried in those books. Maybe she thinks she's an engineer too." Mark's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the trash bin. His ears burned, but he didn't flinch. He'd seen this kind of ridicule before, men who mocked what they couldn't understand. But tonight, something inside him stirred. "She's here," he said softly, barely above a whisper. The room quieted. "In the parking lot. She's been studying mechanical engineering longer than some of you have been working here." The shift in the room was immediate. Laughter died, jaws tightened. The weight of shame crept in, heavy and undeniable. These titans of intellect were suddenly face to face with the ghost of their own arrogance. Nolan paused mid-step, blinking. "You're serious?" It wasn't a challenge. It was curiosity. A fracture in his worldview. Mark met his gaze. Top of her class. Rejected for an internship here 6 months ago. Donna's face fell. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. A beat of silence. Then, Nolan made a decision that would change everything. "Bring her up," he said quietly. Kyle protested. "Sir, she's not an employee. This is classified." "We've tried everything else," Nolan interrupted, voice firm. "Go get your daughter, Mark." The room fell into a stunned hush as Mark disappeared down the hallway. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The thought was unspoken, but it echoed in every mind. What if the answer we mocked is the one we need most? 15 minutes later, the door creaked open. Emily Dawson stepped into the room. She looked nothing like they had imagined. No lab coat, no badge. Just jeans, a t-shirt, and a leather notebook clutched tight to her chest. Her eyes scanned the room, the COs, the engineers, the very people who had dismissed her before even knowing her name. The air shifted. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke volumes. Nolan cleared his throat. "Your father tells us you've been studying mechanical engineering." Emily nodded, her voice caught in her throat. The room fell silent again. She could feel the notebook warming in her hands, as if her mother's presence was somehow alive inside those pages. And just like that, the girl from the parking lot, the invisible one, was finally seen. Kyle Peterson leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smug smile curling at the edges of his mouth like he already knew the outcome of this performance. "Well, Emily," he began, his tone soaked in condescension, "you're looking at 3 years of cutting-edge research from some of the brightest minds in American engineering. We've run every test you can imagine, consulted with MIT, Caltech, Boeing. This engine, it's dead, and no one knows why." His words weren't an explanation. They were a dismissal, wrapped in sarcasm, designed to expose her as a child playing in a world meant for grown-ups. But Emily didn't take the bait. She didn't flinch. Instead, she simply nodded once, then stepped forward, letting her eyes scan the phantom drive as if she were greeting something familiar. She didn't touch a thing. She didn't need to. She was listening, watching, the way a composer listens to silence before the first note. "Have you checked the phase inversion circuits?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Donna Brooks looked up, confused. "The what?" Emily opened her mother's notebook, flipping to a carefully marked diagram. "Phase inversion circuits. They stabilize electromagnetic feedback loops in high-energy systems. If they're off, even slightly, it can cascade into total subsystem collapse. Kyle snorted. Phase inversion circuits? That's not even real terminology. We don't have anything like that. But Emily didn't back down. Her voice, steadier now, pushed through the room. You do. Your documentation just doesn't call it that. You've labeled them field harmony regulators. Same function, different name, and I think the error isn't in the hardware, it's in the timing logic inside your control software. Silence dropped like a stone. She wasn't just guessing, she was diagnosing, and her accuracy pierced the room like a scalpel. Nolan Mercer stepped forward, no longer the detached CEO. Now, suddenly, a man remembering what it was to solve instead of direct. "Show me," he said. Emily moved to the control panel. Her fingers flew across the keys, not hesitantly, but with the quiet assurance of someone who had been here before, if only in simulations and dreams. In minutes, she had navigated through layers of software code that had taken Kyle and his team hours to locate. Here, she pointed to a section of the control loop. The polling frequency is set to check field stability every 0.003 seconds, but your hardware only responds every 0.05 seconds. It's out of sync. The software is asking questions faster than the system can answer, creating an endless loop of false instability that shuts everything down as a safety precaution. The room leaned in. Engineers crowded around the screen, faces glowing in the pale light of discovery. Emily wasn't just offering a theory, she was laying bare the engine's secret weakness. And she was right. "But that's impossible," Kyle muttered, shaken. "We tested that loop 1,000 times. "Under normal conditions," Emily cut in, "you did. But tonight you ran an extended diagnostic. Over time, the cumulative errors built up. You never accounted for long-duration testing. That's why it failed tonight." She looked up. Her fear had melted, replaced by quiet certainty. "The fix is simple. Adjust the polling frequency by 0.002 seconds, or create a buffer system to average the stability checks. Either will stop the cascade." Donna was already typing, inputting Emily's suggestions. The code changes took less than 5 minutes. Then, she hit execute. The room held its breath. A low hum filled the air. One by one, the status lights blinked green. Subsystems lit up. Monitors streamed flawless readouts. The Phantom Drive, the engine of the future, was alive. Running. Perfectly. For a heartbeat, the room was suspended in awe. Then came nothing. No applause, no praise, no stunned cheers, just a cold, surreal silence. Emily stood by the engine, notebook still pressed to her chest, waiting, hoping someone, anyone, would say what needed to be said. But their silence said more. Kyle stared at his laptop like it had betrayed him. His years at MIT, his flawless credentials, they suddenly felt small. Donna kept running tests needing more proof, as if the simplicity of the solution threatened the legitimacy of everything she believed in. Nolan stood still, the hum of the engine now a sharp contrast to the storm of doubt and revelation in his mind. This girl had solved what his most elite engineers could not, and they hadn't even offered her an interview. The silence grew heavier with every second. Emily began to realize something painful. Her success wasn't being celebrated, it was being feared, resented. She hadn't just exposed a flaw in the system. She'd exposed a flaw in them. "Well," she said finally, softly, "I should go. My dad still has work to finish." She turned toward the door. Nobody moved, not even to thank her. Her fingers reached the handle, then Kyle's voice, bitter and low, sliced through the silence. "Lucky guess." Emily stopped. Her back stiffened. She didn't turn. "Excuse me?" she said. Kyle raised his voice. "I said it was a lucky guess. Anyone could have figured it out eventually." The cowardice in his tone was unmistakable. Faced with truth, he chose to wound. Emily turned slowly, the strength in her voice now cut cleaner than any insult. "You're right," she said. "Anyone could have solved it. Anyone who understood EM field theory, timing protocols, systems integration, anyone who knew how to see the whole picture instead of getting lost in their own assumptions." She paused, looked directly at him. "The real question isn't who solved it, it's why none of you did." With that, Emily Dawson walked out, leaving behind an engine humming in flawless perfection and a room full of men and women who had just been taught the difference between intellect and wisdom, knowledge and vision, ego and understanding. She didn't sleep that night. In the still darkness of her small bedroom, she lay awake, replaying it all. The humiliation, the triumph, the silence. She'd cracked the code, solved the unsolvable. But what haunted her most wasn't the problem. It was the reaction. Because when brilliance speaks from unexpected places, the world doesn't always applaud. Sometimes it goes quiet. Back in her small bedroom, Emily lay awake, the quiet darkness closing in like a slow tide. Her body ached with exhaustion, but sleep refused her. Instead, her mind spun in a loop, replaying every second of the night before. The triumphant hum of the Phantom Drive, the silence that followed, Kyle's words, his bitterness, the look in her father's eyes. Had she really made a difference? Or was it, as Kyle so cruelly claimed, just a lucky guess? She reached toward the nightstand, fingers brushing the familiar leather of her mother's notebook. Opening to the final page, she found the line again, written in her mother's precise hand. "Never be afraid to fix what others fear touching." Catherine Dawson had faced the same walls, the same dismissal. People had judged her not by the brilliance of her mind, but by the name of the college on her resume. Unlike Emily, Catherine had never been given the chance to prove them wrong. At 7:23 IEM, her phone rang. Her father's name flashed across the screen. "Dad?" Emily answered. Mark's voice was uncharacteristically cautious. "Sweetheart, you need to come to Avantech this morning. Mr. Mercer wants to see you." "What? Why?" "I'm not sure. He just told me to make sure you're there by 9 o'clock. Main entrance. Ask for him directly." Emily's stomach dropped. "Dad, am I in trouble?" "No, honey," Mark replied gently. "I don't think it's that." As Emily drove toward Avantech, her thoughts warred between hope and dread. The weight of the building loomed ahead, tall glass and gleaming steel reflecting the early morning sun like a fortress of judgment. She pulled her battered Civic between a BMW and a Mercedes. She was a stranger here, an anomaly among pedigree and power. But as she stepped from the car, one sentence echoed in her mind. Belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about finding where your gifts are needed. The front doors opened into a cathedral of industry, polished floors, soaring ceilings, the scent of money and ambition in the air. She asked to see Nolan Mercer. The guard looked confused, then made a call. Within minutes, she was ushered into an elevator rising to the uppermost floors, places she'd only dreamed of. When the doors parted, she stepped into a different world. Marble, mahogany, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows stretching out over the Dallas skyline. The air was still, charged with the kind of silence reserved for important decisions. Nolan's office was impressive, yes, but what caught her breath wasn't the view or the accolades lining the walls. It was the man himself. He looked tired, not defeated, but stripped of the certainty he'd once worn like armor. Emily, he said, his voice careful, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. She said nothing. She waited. First, for how you were treated last night. What you did was extraordinary, and the response you received fell far short of what you deserved. He turned, facing the window. But there's something else. Something you deserve to know. About your mother. Emily's breath caught. My mother? I was the one who rejected her, Nolan said softly. Catherine Dawson. She applied to Avantech in 1999. I reviewed her portfolio myself. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. She was brilliant, Nolan continued, his voice shadowed by regret. She proposed ideas we wouldn't implement until years later. But she didn't have the right credentials. She wasn't from MIT or Stanford. She didn't know the right people. He walked to a drawer and pulled out a folder, weathered, familiar. He kept her file. All these years, whenever we used something she had envisioned, I'd look through it and wonder what we lost by not hiring her. Emily stared at her mother's application, the technical diagrams that were years ahead of their time. Her chest ached with grief and pride. Catherine hadn't just left behind blueprints. She had left behind brilliance. And no one had listened. When I saw what you did last night, Nolan said, I knew. You didn't just solve an engineering problem. You carried forward her legacy. You are your mother's daughter, in every way that matters. Tears pricked at Emily's eyes, but she blinked them back. Why tell me this now? Because I want to do what I should have done 24 years ago, he said. I want to offer you a position in our R&D department. You'll work with Donna Brooks on our most advanced projects, full benefits, competitive salary, your name on patents that will shape the future of aerospace engineering. He paused. I can't change the past. But I can do better now. The offer hung in the air. It was everything Emily had dreamed of, everything her mother had been denied. But Nolan wasn't finished. There's more. The Pentagon review is in 4 hours. Because of your fix, the Phantom drive is running flawlessly. But I want you to present it. I want them to understand that innovation can come from anywhere, from anyone. Emily sat in silence, heart pounding. She thought of her mother, of late nights spent watching her scribble equations that no one believed in, of rejection letters, of quiet resilience. This wasn't just about her anymore. And if I say yes, she asked, what happens to Kyle Peterson and the others who mocked me? Nolan's voice went hard. Kyle is no longer with Avantech. Neither are the others. There's no room here for arrogance that blinds us to talent. We build the future, and that means starting with better choices. Emily opened her mother's notebook once more. Never be afraid to fix what others fear touching. She looked up. I accept, she said, but I have one condition. Name it, Nolan replied. I want to create a scholarship for community college engineering students in my mother's name, the Catherine Dawson Memorial Scholarship. There are more like me out there, more like her, and they deserve a chance. Nolan smiled for the first time. Done. In the months that followed, Emily Dawson became a name whispered in reverence across the aerospace industry, not because of her pedigree, but because of her undeniable brilliance. She didn't just break into the world that had tried to keep her out, she rebuilt it from the inside. But more than any title, more than any patent, her greatest achievement was the door she left open behind her for others who had been told no simply because no one had dared to see them. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is someone brave enough to fix what others fear touching. What began as a job offer had grown into something far greater, a quiet revolution inside one of the most powerful defense contractors in America. It wasn't just Emily who had stepped through Avantech's doors that day, it was the spirit of her mother. the legacy of overlooked brilliance, and a question that no longer could be ignored. What if we've been measuring talent the wrong way all along? Emily's first day on the job was surreal. The same corridors she had once studied from the outside now unfolded before her like a map to possibility. She carried her mother's notebook close, like a compass guiding her through this unfamiliar terrain. Her desk was nestled inside the R&D wing, among professionals with names like MIT, Stanford, and Harvard stamped across their resumes like golden seals. In contrast, her own background felt almost invisible, but Emily had learned that credentials might get you in the room, but what you do once you're there, that's what defines who you become. Her first assignment: improve the energy efficiency of the Phantom drive. The engine worked, but not well enough. Its power consumption exceeded Pentagon standards, and the team had spent weeks failing to fix it. Emily didn't start with code, she started with curiosity. She treated the engine not as a machine, but as something almost sentient. "You're treating it like it's alive," observed Dr. James Chen, a senior engineer with a PhD and 15 years at Avantech. "Isn't it?" Emily replied softly, her fingers gently brushing the surface of the engine. "Every machine has a rhythm, a will. You just have to learn to speak its language." He laughed at first, but then watched as she listened more than she spoke, as she studied not just patterns but pulses. Emily wasn't just engineering, she was translating. Late one evening, long after the lab had emptied, the breakthrough came. Alone with her laptop and her mother's notebook, she noticed something strange. The power usage wasn't erratic. It pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. But it wasn't a natural rhythm. It was irregular, slightly off, creating waves of inefficiency that built up over time like internal static. She turned to one of her mother's handwritten theories: harmonic energy synchronization. An idea so far ahead of its time, no one had dared to test it. Until now. Emily worked through the night, fueled by intuition and a decade of dreams. By dawn, the engine was humming with new life, consuming 30% less energy. When the team arrived the next morning, they found her asleep at her station, surrounded by algorithms and equations that rewrote the rules they thought they knew. Word spread fast. In days, engineers from across departments were asking for her input. The woman once rejected without a second glance was now mentoring PhDs. But this transformation went beyond hardware. Conversations began about what talent looks like, about who gets seen, about how innovation truly emerges. Nolan Mercer found himself asking new questions in leadership meetings. What assumptions are we making? Whose voices aren't we hearing? But not everyone welcomed the change. Some senior engineers whispered behind closed doors, some rolled their eyes during meetings. There were passive-aggressive remarks, little slights, subtle attempts to test her. But Emily had been taught not to chase perfection, but to persist. And every time she delivered a breakthrough, the murmurs got quieter. Then came the Pentagon meeting. Emily stood before a panel of generals, briefing them on the Phantom drive's efficiency upgrades, when General Patricia Morrison interrupted. Her voice calm, cold, and commanding. "Miss Dawson, I've reviewed your background. No advanced degrees, no military experience, no classified defense work. Why should we trust billions of dollars in assets to someone with your limited credentials?" The room went still. The weight of history pressed down on her. The dismissals, the disbelief, the invisible scars inherited from her mother. But Emily didn't flinch. "You're right, General," she said clearly. "I don't come with the traditional qualifications, but I bring something else. A way of seeing that isn't limited by what I was told was possible." She gestured to the humming engine behind her. 6 months ago, your best engineers, armed with every credential imaginable, couldn't get this system to run. Not because they weren't brilliant, but because they were trapped in a mindset. I solved it by asking a different kind of question. Emily paused, locking eyes with the general. I'm not asking you to trust my resume. I'm asking you to trust the results. General Morrison studied her, then turned to the screens. Every metric matched Emily's report. 30% improvement, the general murmured. You know what that means for machine range, for fuel logistics. Emily nodded. Yes, ma'am. It means aircraft can fly farther, stay airborne longer, reach missions that used to be impossible. A long pause. Then, Ms. Dawson, General Morrison said, the military has a saying, results speak louder than rank. And your results are speaking very loudly indeed. That afternoon, the Pentagon signed the Phantom Drive contract, mandating that Emily lead optimization for all future variants. Soon, her impact stretched beyond machines. Young engineers, especially women and those from community colleges or underrepresented backgrounds, began reaching out. They saw in her not just a hero, but a reflection. She launched informal lunches in the break room. People called it Emily's kitchen table, a place where ideas didn't need degrees to be heard. One afternoon, a quiet intern approached her, Rosa Martinez, bright, driven, top of her class, but paralyzed by self-doubt. I have an idea, Rosa whispered. To improve stealth capabilities, but what if I'm wrong? What if they laugh? Emily looked at her, and in Rosa's fear, she saw her own reflection from 6 months ago, sitting alone in a Civic, wondering if she would ever belong. She placed a gentle hand on Rosa's shoulder. Then let them laugh, she said softly, but give them a reason to remember you after they do. Emily leaned in closer to Rosa and smiled gently, her voice soft but unwavering. Can I tell you something my mother once told me? She said. Being wrong is just the first step toward being right. The only real failure is never trying at all. She opened her mother's weathered notebook, flipping to a page riddled with crossed-out equations and half-formed ideas. Look here, Emily continued, her finger tracing faded ink. She was wrong about a dozen things, but every failure brought her closer to something extraordinary. Your idea doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to exist. Because that spark might ignite someone else's breakthrough. Rosa took a breath and nodded. Her idea, as it turned out, was extraordinary. She proposed integrating adaptive camouflage with the Phantom Drive's electromagnetic field manipulation, creating aircraft capable of near invisibility across multiple detection spectrums, thermal, visual, and even electromagnetic. It was bold, unproven, and revolutionary. Months of collaboration followed. Rosa led a cross-departmental team of seasoned engineers, some of whom had once dismissed interns like her. Now they listened. Emily, watching from the sidelines, recognized the pattern. Donna Brooks had once given her that same chance. The cycle had begun anew, and it didn't stop with Rosa. The Katherine Dawson Memorial Scholarship had become more than a financial aid program. It was a lifeline for the underestimated, a mentorship network, an engine of belief. Recipients came from across the nation. Community colleges, technical schools, military families, immigrants chasing possibility. They were the children of janitors, single moms, and welders, and now they were engineers. Emily met with them each semester, not just to talk about schematics or code, but about courage. Your background isn't your weakness, she'd tell them. It's your superpower. You've lived differently. That means you see differently, and the world needs your eyes. 2 years after her hiring, Avantech faced a crisis. A rival contractor had announced stealth propulsion technology that threatened to eclipse the Phantom drive. Investors panicked. Stock dropped 20% in 2 weeks. Rumors of layoffs swirled. The boardroom filled with fear. "We need a moonshot," Nolan Mercer said. "Something that doesn't just catch up, but leaps forward by a decade." Emily, seated quietly at the back, heard the echoes of a familiar voice. Her mother's. A wild, beautiful theory Catherine had called quantum harmonic resonance. No one had dared to build it. Until now. "What if," Emily said slowly, rising to her feet, "we stopped improving the old and built something entirely new?" The room fell silent. She sketched on the whiteboard. Waveforms, resonance fields, particle alignment. Imagine an engine that doesn't burn fuel, doesn't push air. It sings, synchronizes quantum vibrations to create thrust, silent, efficient, limitless. "Impossible," someone whispered. "So was flight," Emily replied. "So was splitting the atom. So was putting a supercomputer in every pocket." She met Nolan's gaze. "The theory exists. My mother wrote it. The materials now exist. The power exists. All we need is the courage." Nolan looked at her sketches. "What would it take?" 18 months. Our best minds, our best tools, and the willingness to risk everything." He turned to the boardroom. Emily's proposal was daring, unproven, and exactly what Avantech was built on. "Do it," he said. "You've got your 18 months. And the future of this company." Project Phoenix was born. Emily assembled a team from all backgrounds, PhDs and community college grads, immigrants and veterans. Diversity wasn't just a goal, it was the secret ingredient. Innovation thrived on difference. The first 6 months were failure after failure. Quantum synchronization was elusive. They faced breakdowns, burnouts, and backlash. But Emily remembered, breakthrough comes only after the breaking point. Month 14, late night. A soft hum echoed through the test chamber. Then, resonance. It worked. The quantum harmonic resonance engine wasn't just functional, it redefined the laws of motion. Silent, limitless, awe-inspiring. Nolan stood before it, speechless. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked. "I finished what my mother started," Emily whispered. The Pentagon review came that December. General Morrison, once a skeptic, now led the committee. After 3 hours of demonstrations, she turned to Emily, quiet and reverent. "Miss Dawson," she said, "2 years ago I questioned your qualifications. I was wrong. You've reminded us that brilliance doesn't wear a uniform or a diploma. It simply solves." The contract was signed within the week. 10 years, $2 billion, Avantech's largest ever. But for Emily, the true reward was far more personal. 6 months later, she stepped onto the TEDx Dallas stage, standing before hundreds of Catherine Dawson Scholarship recipients. Some were just like she had been, working part-time, doubting their worth, still holding on to quiet dreams. "I used to think I lived in my mother's shadow," she began. "But I've learned. I wasn't in her shadow. I was walking in her light." Behind her, a screen lit up with an image of the engine. KD1. Catherine Dawson's initials. Her legacy finally recognized, not in silence, but in song. "Today," Emily continued, "we've helped over 200 students reach for what once felt unreachable. They work at NASA, at Avantech, in startups. They're dreamers, doers, innovators." She spotted a young girl in the front row, wide-eyed, hopeful, clutching a spiral notebook just like hers. "To everyone out there who's ever been told they don't belong," Emily said, voice steady, "remember this. Genius doesn't come with a pedigree. And innovation doesn't need permission. The future belongs to those brave enough to reach for it. She opened her mother's notebook one final time. Never be afraid to fix what others fear touching. The crowd rose in thunderous applause. But Emily saw only one thing, the light in the eyes of the next generation. Because her story wasn't the end, it was the beginning of 1,000 more. The cycle continued. The light moved forward. The brilliance, quiet, underestimated, relentless brilliance, was finally being seen.